Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 286 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is a time to grow. Our quote of the day comes to us from Neil LaBute. The future is now. It's time to grow up and be strong. Tomorrow may well be too late. I had a lot of fun speaking with our guest today. As we are going through challenging times with this pandemic, I was glad to be able to receive Jeff Goins' perspective on how he is handling these uncertain times. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Jeff, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Hey, Chris. Good to be here.
I appreciate it. So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
I feel like I could be up for that. I mean, it's just one person. Yeah.
That's what everybody says. I love it. But the reality is, if every single person positive impacted one person each and every day, I think we'd be in a far better place than we are today.
Totally. Agreed.
So the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself have either a no-quit story or perhaps a really challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and didn't quit.
I mean, I think what's interesting about this is life is full of all kinds of things that we quit and don't quit, right? And I love that little book by Seth Godin called The Dip, where he kind of gives us permission to quit the right things, because the truth is winners do sometimes quit. They quit the right things at the right time. And so for me, I have quit a lot of things, but I'm a pretty reluctant quitter. And if anything, I err on the side of overcommitment, like sticking with something longer than I should. But I think this has mostly served me. It sometimes has hurt me, but I think mostly it's served me, especially, and I don't have to tell you this, Chris, in an age and culture that is pretty non-committal, right? We're pretty instant gratification. I want this, therefore I deserve this, and I can have it now. And I grew up lower middle class, blue collar kind of background, growing up in the Midwest, U.S. And just, I always kind of believed in the value of hard work and saw that very clearly demonstrated by my dad, who was always working manual labor, hands-on kind of jobs. And I think probably the first real time I learned this lesson was in my first job, working as a marketing director at a nonprofit. And I got a couple of years into it and I wanted to quit. I was bored and it was starting to get really hard. And I told my wife at the time, I said, hey, I think I'm done with this. I think I want to go do something else. It was like 2.5 years into it. And she was like, that's great. What are you going to do? I was like, well, I don't know. I'll just quit and figure it out. And she's like, yeah, it doesn't really work that way anymore. We're married and we're building a life together and you can't just kind of up and leave. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Of course I can. I've done this my whole life. And she's like, no, you kind of need a plan. And I was like, fine, grumble, grumble, grumble. And, I stuck with it another 6 months, and I was just bored and frustrated, and all of the work was on me. I started out as a copywriter, became a marketing manager, and now I was kind of a one-man marketing team, bootstrapping all this digital marketing stuff that we were doing, and I didn't like it, And 6 months into it, I decided to stick with it, and grow through this angsty period. Ended up hiring a team and learned how to be a leader, and everything got a lot easier. And I was in that job another 5 years and learned a bunch of valuable lessons. But every 2 years or so into it, I would start to feel this I don't like this. Something needs to change. And instead of quitting, I would just kind of double down and I would ask myself the question, if I lean into this, what lesson needs to be learned here right now? And I've been working for myself now for almost the past 10 years, and I've experienced the same thing. Every couple of years, things get harder. I get bored and I feel this desire to want to check out. And my default, because of the lessons that I learned at this first job that I had, is to just kind of dig in and see, maybe I need to grow here. Maybe this is an opportunity not to leave or check out or go do something else, but maybe I need to increase. I need to grow in some area that I'm currently not growing in. And that's kind of been my practice. And it doesn't mean I don't ever quit anything, but when things get hard, I see it as a sign of potential to grow instead of just as a sign that I need to check out.
I appreciate you sharing that backstory, and I think it's an interesting perspective, as it happens to probably a lot of us, not only with jobs, but in different things that we do. And it gets to that point where you make that decision. Are you going to leave, or are you going to, as you said, grow and learn? So I appreciate you touching on that. Wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do today.
Sure. So I am a writer who teaches other writers and creatives how to succeed. And I've done that primarily through blogging and online marketing. Like I said, I was a marketing director for a nonprofit. And so about 10 years ago, I felt like I had something to say to the world. And I had been developing all these skills. And by the way, I didn't even know what I wanted to say. I knew that I needed to say something. I had this itch that I couldn't quite scratch. And I realized I was feeling the call to become a full-time writer. So I started writing books and started sharing my ideas with the world through blogging and podcasting and teaching online courses. And I've been doing that for almost the past decade. But I teach courses on writing, blogging, creative entrepreneurship, and then I write personal development and self-help books for the general market.
So I got to ask you a question about that first book. I think so many people have heard that everybody has a book in them, or the idea that they want to write one book. And I know that so many people don't ultimately get to that point. So maybe a tough question, but how difficult was it writing that first book?
So I actually don't believe that everybody has a book in them. There's 7.5 billion people in the world, something like that. And there's more and more every day. And if everybody wrote a book, that would be a lot of books. And so I don't think the world needs more books. I think it needs better books. So I'm not here to dissuade people from writing their book. In some ways I make a living off of helping people get their books written and out into the world. But I'm tired of all this, just write it, just write any old book, because I respect the medium and technology of a book so much that rushing to write one, or just pushing any old book out into the world, is a really good recipe to write a bad book. And so if you're going to write a book, write a really great one, the best one that you can, of course. And look, I'm not saying it has to be The Great Gatsby or something, but do the best that you can, sharing a message that matters with the world. So what did that look like for me? Was it difficult? In some ways, it was the easiest book that I wrote because I didn't know any better, right? What is that old Socrates quote? The more I learn, the more I realize what I don't know, right? And the same thing is true with any craft. The better that you get at it, the harder it feels, and the more of a novice you feel like. So in some ways, that first book that I wrote, I just kind of threw it together, right? And I was like, this is the best book that I know how to write. And it was easily the worst book I'd ever written. And I'm proud of the effort that I put into it. And I did the best that I knew how to do at the time. But now I know a lot more. And every subsequent book, I've written 6 books now, gets harder and takes longer because I take the work more seriously. So on one hand, I'm glad that I just did it, and I didn't know how bad I would be at it. And on the other hand, I'm glad that I have stuck with it, and I continue to try to write better and better books. For me, I think of my work now not as like the next project that I do, but as the body of work that I'm trying to create, where each individual piece is saying something, but it's also contributing to the portfolio that I'm creating through all the work that I'm doing. And so now that I've been doing this for 10 years professionally, I'm really thinking about not just the next thing that I do, but how all of the work that I'm doing fits together to create some long-term message that I want to share with the world.
I liked how you put that, and I think that's true in many different areas of life. What you do is your entire portfolio. But you said something that was funny that I wanted to touch on is your first book. You mentioned that it's the worst book that you've written, and I think the flip side of that is what happens when the first book you write is the absolute best, and then each and every one after that just gets worse. So I think in some ways, obviously, you never want to put out something that's not your best to your best ability, but the reality is as you continue to work on your craft, I think the hope and the idea is that you continually get better along the way.
Right, and of course, it depends what you mean by best, right? That was the best book that I knew how to write at the time, and since then, it is the worst written book I've ever published because I keep getting better, which is wonderful. Now, it doesn't mean that it didn't sell well. It sold better than some of the other books that I've written. And it doesn't mean that people didn't like it, because lots of people did like it, and other books I've written people have liked not as much. It just means that was the best work I could do at the time, and since then I've grown and I keep doing better and better work. And you're absolutely right. I mean, who wants to peak at the beginning and then just feel like everything else is kind of downhill from here? That doesn't feel very exciting. I want to keep moving in the direction of getting better at my craft. And again, I keep learning and growing and appreciating good writing. And so for me, best is about mastery. It's about getting better and better at sharing a message in a clear and compelling way for a particular group of people. And when I started this, I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about how do I write something that people like and sell a bunch of copies. And now as I get into it, I think of it as a craft, as an art form. How do I do this thing in such a way where I'm honoring how it's done, right? I'm treating it with a certain air of respect, and that in the doing, in the writing, in the communicating of an idea, I'm practicing something that people have practiced for millennia, and I want to do something meaningful that contributes to that body of work without putting too much pressure on myself at the same time. So yeah, I don't know. I take it more and more seriously the more that I do it. And I hope that I continue to improve and grow and do it in such a way where I continue to be proud of the work that I'm doing, regardless of financial or critical success.
I think that's important is self-evaluation and evaluating the work and feeling proud of what you're doing. So an interesting question that I ask everybody is, if you had to define yourself, but you could only pick one word, what word would you pick?
Thinker. I mean, I was sorting through a bunch of words. I would often call myself a writer vocationally, but it's not who I am and what I do. And then I thought, well, in the strictest sense of the word, I am not my body. I'm not my mind. I'm not my brain. I'm not my feelings. There is an awareness, a knowingness that sits below all these things, where I'm aware that I'm doing all these things without necessarily being those things. And I wanted to say, well, I am a consciousness, but that feels a bit woo-woo to say. And I think it's true. But I think at the core of everything that I do, I'm a thinker. I'm a deep thinker. I think thoughts and then try to find ways to communicate them. I do that in my relationships and my work. And it is the engine for everything that I do is thinking.
So as a writer, I'm curious to get your response to this question. Is we're always looking to add value to our listeners, and I'm curious if you're reading anything currently right now, or perhaps you've read something recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Gosh, I read so many things. I'm always forgetting what I'm reading. Yeah, let me look. I just reread a book. It was actually like an audio program. And it's about self-awareness and psychology and even spirituality. And it's a book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello, who's one of my favorite thinkers. He's an Indian priest and psychotherapist. He's a Jesuit, and it's like psychology meets spirituality meets just general self-awareness. But he says in that book, what we are aware of, we are in control of, and what we are unaware of is in control of us. And I mean that one little truism has really just rocked my world. That there are anything that I am not aware of about myself is in some way controlling me, simply because I'm just not aware of it. So I'm responding, I'm reacting in unconscious or subconscious ways. So that's a great book if you're into mindfulness, you want to become a more self-aware person, you want to grow as a human. Can't recommend Anthony DeMello enough, and the book is Awareness.
So you touched on the word rereading, and I wanted to ask you, it's something that's come up quite a bit in the last probably year plus on our podcast, and it's something that I hadn't done for probably a year or two in regards to rereading different books, and then so many different guests touched on it. Wanted to just ask you, do you occasionally reread certain books that you're a big fan of or that have impacted you, or do you not reread books?
I don't reread books too much. I wish I were one of those people, because I love the idea of, like, a friend of mine, says, oh, I read, such and such every Christmas, right? I always want to be one of those people who, like, sits by the fire and reads the same book every Christmas Eve or something, and I don't, because there's just so many books to read. I would rather go find something new. But that is a book that I've read multiple times. The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is another book that I keep coming back to. Shorter books, I think, are easier. Or if I had like a really enjoyable experience with a novel, movies are this way too for me, where I'll watch them or I'll read a book that's a story, and I'll just get something completely different out of it. I've read The Chronicles of Narnia a few times, both as a child and as an adult, and now as a parent. But yeah, I mean, usually I read it and then I'm on to the next thing, or I'm trying to find the books and thoughts and thinkers that influence the book that I just read.
I appreciate you expanding on that. As we are going through these challenging times today during this coronavirus, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world, I was curious, how are you staying positive and how are you staying upbeat, not only as an individual and a professional, but also as a parent as well?
Well, I mean, some days I'm not. I was talking to a friend last night in New Zealand, and I asked her, are you happy? And she said, right now or in general or what? I said, yeah, all the things. She said, no, I'm kind of sad today. I said, oh, really? Tell me about that, and she told me and explained why, and felt a little bit lonely. She said, generally, I said, I think you're a pretty confident, upbeat person. She says, yeah, I am. And there's a part of me that's sad and unhappy today. And so I honor that. And so I think the practice that has been most helpful to me right now is being aware of and honoring all the things that are going on in me. And I think it's very dangerous when we say you've got to be upbeat, you've got to think positive. I don't disagree with that. I agree with and understand and appreciate a lot that the positive psychology movement has done for us and is continuing to do in our world today when it comes to self-awareness, personal growth, etc. But we've got to be careful with how we apply things like positive thinking if what we're really doing is repressing emotions because we're trying to be positive, because that's very, very unhealthy. And if you repress an emotion, it will get expressed in and through your body in very unhealthy ways, through stress, through disease. It's just not a good thing. So how am I staying upbeat? At a real practical level, I'm not. I'm just letting myself feel whatever I'm feeling and mindfully watching those feelings, letting them be what they are without clinging to them, and then letting them pass. I've never had a feeling, positive, quote unquote, or negative, that hasn't eventually passed. I'm happy, ecstatic, elated, and eventually that changes. And then I'm sad, and eventually that changes, and I'm mad, and that changes, or I, am overwhelmed with anxiety and fear, and that passes. I will say the things that are helping me feel most like myself are, one, getting a lot of sleep. I slept 10 hours the other night, and I felt like I could have kept sleeping, which was a good sign for me that I'm stressed and there's something going on in my body, and I just trusted that. And so I think even listening to my body and paying attention to what's going on in me and being aware of it, I think has been really good. But I would say the one like really great practice, so sleep is part of it, daily walks, getting outside, that'll change my state like that. I don't know about you, Chris, but just, it's starting to be really pretty outside. It's spring here in Nashville right now. Walking even for 15, 20 minutes at the park, squeezing it in between a busy day of calls or something. Most days I try to walk an hour or two every day at least. I mean, I'm walking 10, 15, 20,000 steps pretty easily every day. So it's an important part of my daily routine. And then just kind of sitting and meditating, breathing, watching the world. That's really helping. So sleep, walking, getting out in nature, and then just breathing, call it whatever you want, meditating, whatever, just sitting and remembering that I'm here. And that's a wonderful thing. That in and of itself, I made it another day. I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I think that it's very key to make sure that during these challenging times, you have that time to take for yourself, whether, like you said, it's going for a walk, whether it's meditating, whether it's just breathing. And a friend of mine said something interesting the other day, and we were having a conversation. I think it just hit me differently that day. He said things are a little bit slower in some ways, and I kind of looked around, and the reality was where we were talking, it was on a typical busy street, but it was much slower. There was less noise. And I was talking to my kids this past weekend. We were out playing soccer, and we just talked about and noticed kind of that the air and everything seemed just cleaner. So I think that in times like this, it's taking advantage of the time, slowing down, and I guess maybe enjoying life itself a little bit more.
I feel that. It's really interesting. I was going for a walk. I have I live by a park, and there's a pond here, and this was weeks ago, but I was going for a walk, and I was on this side of the pond and they were on that side of the pond, and we were being socially distant. I didn't know this person, but I saw them, and they like really emphatically waved at me, and I waved back. And I'm sure this depends on where in the world you live. Of course it does, these social norms and whatnot. But like, it just seems like people are friendlier. I mean, on one hand, there are the like random people where you like walk and maybe I'm aware of if I sniffle or cough or something, and they just like jump far away or something. But for the most part, it seems like people are friendlier, and they're more eager to connect with strangers because it's like we're all kind of in the same boat right now, right? And it's so interesting to me how things are slower, and because we can't be around a lot of people, including loved ones and friends in some cases, we all kind of acknowledge, our shared humanity, and it's, I don't know, I'm someone who likes being around people, and I've noticed that like people are nodding and smiling and waving and saying hello to me when normally I think we would just pass each other. And it's like we're all kind of aware of what we're missing out on. And I hope it means that we won't take it for granted the next time we get to be with more people. So I feel that slowness, and there's also like a familiarity that we have with each other now. And I think that's been a real gift.
Yeah, I like how you put that. And I think, to your point, it is, and it does seem that people are friendlier. And I was having a conversation with a client. I think part of it too is this is the first time that everybody's going through the same thing. And what I mean by that is during our normal busyness, we all have problems, challenges, but the reality is somebody in their mind is dealing with this horrific problem, issue, challenge at work. and someone else they pass while they're walking, the reality is they think that that person's not, so you kind of just stay within your own mind.
Yeah.
But here, as you're looking around, and to your point about that person who was waving at you, this is the first time, I think, and I'm 41 years old, in my lifetime, where everybody can say in some way, shape, or form they're dealing with this coronavirus. And I think that, to your point, is just interesting. And I'm hoping that when we get back, as you said, to this new normal and we're with other people, and I just hope that we don't take it for granted. I also hope that we don't just flip back into the craziness nonstop, 24/7, 365.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to add a little bit of levity on a lighter note, but to your point, I have a friend who's trying to date during this time. And I'm like, what's that like, man? He goes, dude, it's easy. It's easy to talk to women now. He goes, because for the first time in my life, I know what they're going through. He's like, we're all going through the same thing, and we all have something to talk about. And everybody's a little bit low, or a lot of people are lonely, or you just know what's going on with everyone. And I thought, that's true. Like, when else have you known, like, universally, one thing that pretty much everybody in the world right now has in common? It is fascinating. People have used terms like the great equalizer. It's wonderful. It's wonderful when anything, even a tragedy, even a crisis, even a pandemic, can allow people to remember their shared humanity. I think it's a great thing. That aspect of it, anyway.
Yeah, I love that. I think that shared humanity is so important. So I want to ask you a question. If you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself one piece of advice, what would it have been?
Be patient with yourself as you become who you know that you are. And I think under that umbrella of advice, be patient with yourself, is all kinds of things. Go to therapy, right? Take care of yourself, eat right, go for walks, read more, all those things. But I have always been in a hurry to get somewhere. I'm a big fan of therapy. I've got quite a lot of skeletons in the closet that I've pulled out over the years. But I was recently meeting with a new therapist, and I said, okay, great, let's get down to it. I want to do this. Here's my backstory, because they do all these getting to know you questions. I had previously been meeting with a therapist for about 5 years, and then I changed. And I was like, all right, I've been through all this. I know the words. I read the books. Like, I'm not like all your everyday screw ups. Like, I've got my stuff together and how screwed up I am. So let's get down to it. And I really wanted to get into the work and move through all of the getting to know you stuff, because we took like 2 sessions, just me telling my story. And it wasn't like I knew all this stuff, right? I wanted to get to the work. And she said, that's great. Can you feel yourself right now wanting to rush through this part? And I was like, oh, yeah. And I do that with everything, especially anything that feels uncomfortable. Let me get through this. Let me get through this. Let me get through this. I'll do it with my kids sometimes. Like, I'll kind of quote unquote fall asleep, right? They're playing, and especially at nighttime, like 5 o'clock, it's like, okay, everything has to sort of hit at the right time, or it's meltdown. It's like, we've got to eat dinner at this time, then we've got to play for this much time, but we can't play any longer than that. Then we have to have baths, and we need, and I've had kids crying at 10:30 at night because just the routine got messed up, and now they can't fall asleep, but everything is just terrible, So it's like, I'm anxiously trying to rush through each part to, frankly, sometimes just have a little bit of time to myself. And I can feel myself wanting to rush through it. It's like, I'm not experiencing any of this. And so I've always been in a hurry to get to where I'm going, right? As a kid wanting to grow up, as an adult wanting more money, or, as a parent wanting the kids to grow up, it's just, I'm often always in a hurry to the next place. And I wish I could tell my 20-year-old self, like, take time getting to where you want to go, including becoming the person that you want to be, because it's all part of the process.
I think that's great advice, and it goes kind of ironically what we're going through today. But I think a lot of us, and I'm very similar to you in a lot of ways in regards to specific routine, and especially with kids, is you got to be in bed at this time. And you kind of, to your point though, you kind of want to rush through it. And I don't think it's, at least from my perspective, it's not rushing through it because you don't enjoy it or didn't want to enjoy it, but you wanted to get through it to make sure that everything goes the right way. And I think
that's right.
A lot of people have said something similar in regards to that advice, where it's just slow down a little bit, enjoy the process. So for our listeners that would like to follow up and find out more about you, what's the best way for them to do so, as far as social media, also website, and also if they would like to get and find out more about the books you've written?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it. And the last point on that was what I mean to say is I am often dissatisfied with where I am in life, my health, my mental health, some habit that I'm doing. Maybe I procrastinated something, and then I start judging that. And I'm learning to just be patient with wherever I'm at in the process. And a lot of my work now is about sharing what I'm learning as I'm doing it. So as a writer, I was sharing, here's what I'm learning about writing. As an entrepreneur, here's what I'm learning about business. And I'm just always sharing what I'm doing while I'm doing it. So in that note, you can find me sharing all those things in all the places on my blog at goinswriter.com. My last name is like coins, but with a G, or like groins, as they reminded me in middle school with FDR. And now you won't forget it, goinswriter.com. My name is Jeff Goins. You can find me at Jeff Goins on all the socials. I'm particularly active on Instagram these days. And yeah, you can sign up for my email newsletter, which I put out about once a week, and my podcast at the website, goinswriter.com.
Awesome. And then last question for you is, if you have some parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
So, let's talk about quitting for a second, because when I started this little writing career that turned into a great living, a full-time vocation, I was jealous of all the people who had done this before me, and it seemed that things were easier for some people. I mean, you just see people and you're like, oh, they got so lucky, right? And I didn't get that lucky, right? And I remember a friend telling me that when he started his blog, on the 6th day of his blog, 6,000 people showed up to his blog, and he's like, that's just how I knew. That's how I knew this is what I was supposed to be doing. And I was like, well, on day 6, I had 4 people show up to my blog. So does that mean I wasn't supposed to be doing it? It's like, what is that? Luck? Is it just hard work? It's his story. It's not mine. So I realized there were some people who just seemed to get lucky, and there were other people, I don't know, looked like, they were kind of born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and they could be kind of lazier about it, and things just came more easily to them. There's a certain amount of privilege. And I realized, the same thing is true for me. And so I began to develop an adage for myself, just a little saying that I would tell myself as a reminder of the work that I needed to do. And it was, you can outwork the lazy, and you can outlast the lucky. You can outwork the lazy, and you can outlast the lucky. Meaning, I can't control how lucky you are, and I don't, you might be luckier than I am, or you might just have more natural talent than I have. But I can work harder and stick around longer than a lot of people, and that little saying proved true for me, right? There were plenty of people that had greater luck and seemed to have more talent than me that just kind of fizzled out over time. And I just worked harder and stuck around longer and was able to get to where I wanted to go. And so perseverance, stick-to-itiveness, and just a diligence, a willing to work hard, I think are great skills that all of us can exercise.
I love that. Outwork the lazy, outlast the lucky. Did I have that right?
Yeah, you heard me pausing because I haven't said it in a while, so I had to make sure I said it the right way. Yeah, work harder than people who are lazy, and stick around because eventually luck wears out. Yeah.
Well, listen, I truly, truly appreciate you sharing what you did today. I loved a lot of it, especially gearing towards the slowing down perspective. And the last piece, I just absolutely love that. I've never heard it in those words. Outwork the lazy, outlast the lucky. Well, listen, thank you again for your time, and I hope that you and I can connect again soon.
Likewise, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you for listening to episode number 286. Jeff touched upon slowing down, meditation, and breathing, something I think is so important, not only during these challenging times, but in general. Jeff left us with a fantastic quote: "Outwork the lazy and outlast the lucky." I absolutely love that. So that's exactly what I challenge each and every one of you to do today, myself included. Outwork the lazy and outlast the lucky. And remember, we rise by lifting others up.
And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.